Welcome back to another episode of the Wilderness Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rob Minturn. Today I'm joined by Audrey Fafi. She owns A2 Skullwork. She has been doing skull work for pretty much since I've known you guys. It seems like it's been a long time. I wanted to have her on today because of the time of year. We're launching it or recording it in September 5th, and it's going to launch probably next week when I'm elk hunting. So I'm going to launch yours and Louise's back to backs for some taxidermy stuff so folks know what to do in the field. That way you guys aren't getting raunchy, nasty skulls for taxidermy stuff. One, thank you for joining. Two, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more?
Oh, I kind of think you nailed it. Thanks for having me, number one. And number two, yeah, been doing skull cleaning since, well, I guess full time since 2018, but I've kind of always been a little bit involved with it. Started doing it in high school, actually. A friend of mine, his dad had a taxidermy shop just out of his garage, and in the fall, they were just looking for some extra hands with skinning or anything, and sort of just interning with him and helping pick up the slack around the shop, and really liked it. Mounted a couple things, did actual taxidermy like skin mounts with, I did a full body coon, and then I helped with some deer, and that was fine, but I really liked the skull side more than the hides and the actual, putting full body stuff together. And it left a lot more time for me to actually go hunt in the fall because my beetles do a lot of the stuff, or it's a lot of, kind of hurry up and wait kind of stuff. Whereas dealing with hides, it's, make sure you get them skinned and on ice right away. And it's just a lot more involved. So the skull side for me was a better fit, and I kind of like it a lot better. I think they're a lot more interesting when you actually get the skin off the bone, and you can kind of tell a lot more about the life that animal lived just looking at its skull and its teeth and its bone structure versus just skin on a foam mount and here's the rack. So that kind of tripped my trigger a little bit, and I really liked that side of things and got a little more involved into it after I got done doing the mineral nutrition side of things, and I had some free time, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna look into this, doing it the right way, because I feel like almost everybody nowadays is, you know, oh, I just boil my skulls in the garage, sitting around drinking beer with my buddies afterwards. And it's like, yeah, I can tell. I can tell that's how you did it, because it's not a great end product. They're either really greasy or they're cracked or brittle because they boiled them too hot or whatever. And it's like, there's got to be a really good way to do this without destroying it and without, I guess, just taking the cheap, quick, easy way out. So did like 2 years worth of homework to figure out how to do it right. And every day it's still a learning curve. I mean, there's always ways to better your process on things to get a better end result. And so I'm constantly learning stuff every year. But so far I think I've got it down pretty decent. But yeah, it's kind of fun to do, and I don't know, it's working for us so far. So
You brought up beetles, and I that was one of the things I wanted to touch on is why beetles.
all the research I did was pretty much beetles were the best. They're going to give you the best end results because they don't touch the bone. They just touch all the flesh and the tendon and the cartilage and all the actual biological material surrounding the bone. And so the bone itself is not going to be compromised. Anytime you add heat to bone, it's going to weaken it. It's going to make it a little more brittle, and it's going to, the skull plates are going to separate. It's going to crack here and there. And sometimes if you actually boil them or simmer them at too high of heat, you're going to cook the grease into the skull, and it's going to be almost impossible to degrease it and get it fully cleaned. So with the beetles, they just take all the skin and flesh off, and then the bone is left completely whole and I guess just perfect and uncompromised. So then you're free to degrease it and take whatever avenues from there without that bone structure being weakened or compromised or brittle or flaky or anything that you get from applying heat methods to them. And so that's what I really liked, that avenue. But I get that it's not for everybody, because keeping beetles is actually really, really difficult. I ended up losing quite a few colonies at the beginning, just trying to figure out how to keep the damn things alive because they're so finicky. They got to be humidity controlled and temperature controlled, and the ventilation has to be right, and they have to be completely, I guess, free from being infiltrated by any other kind of bug, because black flies will wipe out your entire colony. If you get a certain midge in there, it'll wipe out your whole colony. Like, They're really hard to keep alive, but if you can keep them alive and you have the right space to do it in, like a completely sealed room with good ventilation, they're a really excellent asset to have when it comes to skull cleaning. But they're not for everybody. I mean, if you don't have the room to keep them or you don't have, the right area to keep them temperature controlled and humidity controlled, they're just going to die and you're just going to be throwing money out the door, and it's a waste of time if you're not going to be able to give them the environment that they need to thrive. So we went through a lot of losses of colonies while we're just learning how to do all this. At my peak, I had probably a colony of about 10 to 12,000 beetles. My heater died on Valentine's Day and they all froze and died. So I had to start over and it was awful. So just, yeah, I wouldn't, just word of advice to anyone that wants to get into it, don't start with beetles unless you know that it's going to be kind of a process to just even keep them physically living and breathing, because they're kind of finicky and they're kind of hard. If you can do all that and you do your research and you're like, yeah, I think this is something I can do, by all means do it, because they're going to give you the best skull product in the end, just because of how they attack the flesh and leave the bone completely uncompromised. Like, especially if I'm using them for predators or really small skulls, they can get in those nasal cavities that are really intricately designed that if you boil them, a lot of the time that just falls out. But if you look inside the actual nose of like a predator or a coon or a bobcat or something, it's so delicate and it looks like, I don't know, it almost looks like spider webs, but it's bone and cartilage, and they leave that intact. And it's so cool to see the difference between a beetle clean skull and just a boiled regular processed skull, because there is no comparison. It's night and day and it's super cool. So that's why we chose to go that route. And yeah, they're fun, they're cool, but they're very difficult. So
So if someone is out west, they shoot an elk or a mule deer, and they're only going to do their own skull. They're not going to do a bunch of skulls. Are beetles worth the investment? Or one, how expensive are they to get a starter kit to get them going? And then how many beetles do you need for one skull? But is it worth someone just to do one skull?
if you're just doing one skull, absolutely not. It's not worth the investment. I think my starter colony, I got 500 bugs for, I think it was like $85 plus shipping or whatever. But I went through a really reputable place. You can go on Amazon and type in dermestid beetles and they will send you, oh, here's 5,000 beetles for $50. You can do that. But a lot of the time you're doing that and you're going to get them and they'll either be dead because they didn't ship them properly and they got cold, or they got, whatever reason that they didn't make it in transport, or they're going to come and already be infested with a mite or a midge or some other type of bug is going to be in there. Your colony's not going to survive. So if you're just doing one or two skulls a year, I'd say no way. There's different avenues to go. But if you actually want to do a handful a year or possibly make a business out of it, it's a decent investment, because you can get a decent starter colony, like say like 5,000 bucks. You can get a starter colony from a reputable dermestid breeder, I guess, or people that already do skull cleaning that have good colonies going. A lot of people will sell off starter colonies because they're constantly exponentially reproducing. And some people just need to get rid of them. They just have too many, or they can't keep up with feeding them all or maintaining them all, or they're growing out of their tank space. So the only way I would say, if you want to get started in beetles, is find a reputable dermestid beetle breeder, I guess, and go through them, and they're going to be certified mite free and everything else. But just buying them online, I wouldn't go that avenue at all, because you're just setting yourself up for failure and it's going to cost more money in the end. If you're just going to do one or two skulls, or you're out west and you just want to do one skull of your own, I would say either do like enzyme maceration or just regular maceration, or there's other ways around it. But beetles are not going to be for just the one or two skull a year kind of guy.
So there are other ways to do skulls besides boiling them and besides beetles.
Yeah, boiling is honestly kind of a last resort. There's a lot of people on like Facebook, for example. There's skull cleaning groups that we're a part of on there, and most of them, if you're yeah, boiling's great, all we do is boil, they won't even let you in the group, because they're like, that's just blasphemy. How dare you say that? You're wrong. Not saying anyone that boils the skulls, if it works for you and that's what you want to do, fine, do it. But to give you the best quality product is going to be either a dermestid beetle cleaned skull, or to do maceration, which is, it's a really good way to get a very good product, but you're not going to be macerating stuff if you live in town and you've got neighbors because it stinks. You're literally taking a skull with flesh and tissue on it and putting it in a bucket of water and just letting it sit in that bucket of water until the natural bacteria and cultures in the water and in the flesh comes off the bone, and then there's just plain bone. But that usually involves a lot of smell and a lot of maggots and a lot of just general nastiness that most people don't have the stomach for, or their neighbors don't have the stomach for. So unless you're out in the country and you don't have close neighbors and you're downwind, by all means do that. Yeah, the enzyme maceration thing is kind of a smelly avenue as well. So if you can stomach it, by all means, that's going to be like that's a really great product too. I haven't actually found many differences between a beetle clean skull and a macerated skull because they're both good, solid products. I actually think that macerating them, they degrease better because they're already saturated. So I guess the pores in the skull or the bone are already kind of open. So once you start putting the degreasing liquid to it, the pores are already wide open to allow that grease to filter out. Whereas if you take a beetle clean skull, it's dried and it's hard. And so then when you put it in the degreasing liquid, now it kind of has to soften up and the pores have to soften up and open before that degrease can start to be leaching out of it. So yeah, there's pros and cons to both, but yeah, macerations usually what I will do if I get a skull that's already a little rotten, because dermestid beetles don't like eating rotten meat. So one, they either won't touch it if it's already rotten, or two, I don't like giving it to them anyway, because if it's rotting, now it's got other bugs that are probably on it. There's other, maggots or disco rice that we like to call them are usually already on there, or fly eggs of some kind are usually already on that flesh. So if you put that right in your beetle tank, those eggs are going to hatch, and now your beetle tank's compromised from whatever bug was already on that rotting skull. So anything that goes into my beetle tank, it's either going to be frozen right away to, for a week or so to kill off whatever's on it, or it's got to go in there like the same day it's shot. It's got to be really fresh because otherwise they're going to get compromised and killed because they're really finicky. So
With the field care, how can someone best prepare? Again, let's go out west, mule deer, elk, because that's what's going on right now, even caribou up in Alaska and sheep. But if they want to prepare the skull in the field for you because they know they're going to send it to you or somebody else who does beetles, how do they best do that?
So there's two ways to go about it, and I think I'm a little more lenient on stuff just because I know if I get a skull and it's already rotten a little bit or a little spoiled, or I'm not too happy with how it looks, I'll just throw it in the maceration tank and I'll do it that way because I've got the room to do it. So I do macerate a lot of stuff as well. But if someone's like, hey, I want this beetle cleaned, this is exactly what I want, I would say get the head or the skull cut off and just wrap it in plastic bags as tight as you can get them to make sure that no other bugs physically get on that skull, and then get it on ice as quickly as you can. Get it frozen. Do everything you can so that it's not spoiled. Once it starts to spoil, the bugs really won't touch it, and then you're kind of up a creek. You can't really come back from spoiled meat. And once it's spoiled, the only way really to attack that at all is it's got to be macerated. So with beetle cleaning, either you can either skin it or just cut the head off and get it wrapped tight in bags and make sure that no other bugs can get on that before the beetles do, because you don't want them to get compromised or, I guess, infiltrated by any other outside bug, because that'll kill the colony.
Do they need to take off the eyes or take out the eyes and take off the bottom jaw and all that?
I actually don't. So when I started, I used to want all that done for me. Like take the jaw off, take the eyes out, get it stripped with as little flesh as on there because that's less work that I have to do. But a lot of times people that are doing that, they've never done it before, or they're not super handy with a sharp knife, and it comes to you and it's butchered, and you can see the scrape marks where their knife was getting around the eye socket, and now that bone itself is a little bit chipped or broken, or they tried to ream on that jaw, and because they didn't cut the little certain tendons that make it easy and they just reamed on it, they're going to break something. So I'd rather have someone honestly just bring it to me whole, and I'll do it. I'll spend the extra 15 minutes doing it myself, because that way, I know exactly what cuts to make it go a little easier, and I know down at the base of the eye socket. I'm not really sure what the actual term is, but I refer to them as bubbles. It's like a thin layer of bone. It's so thin that you could just puncture it with your fingertip. And if you leave that intact, I mean, it's going to be a way better looking skull, but it's really hard to work around. And if you're just if you don't really know how to take out an eyeball and you're just kind of fishing around in there with a knife, you're going to puncture it. And not saying it's the worst thing in the world because it's hanging on a wall. You can't see it anyway, but it's just something that got broken that didn't need to be broken. If you would have just brought it to me, I would have done it and it wouldn't get broke. So yeah, people could take the eyes and the jaw and all that stuff off if they wanted to. It's less work that I have to do, but also if you don't know how to do it properly or you're rushing it or anything like that, things could get broken and then, it's I'd rather just let them, let me do it. I'll do it in 10 minutes and it'll be done and it won't get broke. So the worst thing I have to deal with, and I have a really strong stomach, obviously, because I have to for this line of work, but I will deal with brains and eyeballs all day long, not bat and eyelash. I will deal with maggots all day long, not bat and eyelash. The worst thing for me is when I crack open that jaw, and if they shot a deer that was feeding in a cornfield or a hayfield or something, and they shot it and it ran and died, and then they just cut the head off and brought it to me. I open that and there's still chewed food like in the back of its throat or on its tongue. Oh, it's that I can't handle that. That's honestly the worst. So I don't know. If someone else wants to deal with that for me, that's fine too. But yeah, that's the worst part. I'd rather deal with maggots and brains and eyeballs than chewed food in the back of a deer's mouth.
Leave the brains and the eyeballs. That's fine, but just make sure to swipe the throat clear.
Yeah, yeah. Take like a Q-tip or something in there. Make sure he swallows and then shoot him. I don't know.
I know you've had skulls sent to you. A friend of mine sent his skull to you from California.
That huge black tail. He was so pretty.
Yeah, that was an awesome hunt. We didn't know what we were doing. I'm shocked that did you beetle clean that one or did you have to use the enzyme stuff?
I'm trying to remember. I think I beetle cleaned that one, but I know when I got him, I threw him in the freezer for a while just to kill off anything that might have gotten onto it. Because I can't remember the exact thing. I'm probably lying here, but I thought I heard that flies lay eggs on dead tissue within like 3 hours of it being dead. It was something crazy, some crazy stat like that. Could have been a half hour. I could be wrong. I don't know. But so I was just preparing, like, okay, it's coming from a long way. They're out in the field when they shot it, and it's going to, probably take a while to get packaged up and packed out and then shipped out. So just to be on the safe side, I'm throwing it in the freezer. And so I think I let it freeze for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, took it out, and it didn't really smell that bad. It didn't look that spoiled. So I just kind of took a chance, threw it in there, and the bugs actually touched it. So I keep going back to how finicky they are, which is why I don't want people to be like, oh, I'm going to start beetle cleaning stuff because it's, you just throw it in the tank and they do all the work. No, because they're so finicky that I've had them. So for example, I had a family, they shot these 2 deer opening weekend of gun season over in Osseo, Wisconsin. These 2 bucks were both, I think, same age, 2.5-year-old, 8 points, whatever, shot on the same field in the same afternoon on the same farm. So you'd think that they're probably eating the same stuff. They could have been related for all I know, whatever. They got them to me right away. I spun them out, put them in the beetle tank, and they attacked this one and had it completely picked clean within, I think, like 2 or 3 days. And the other one, they wouldn't touch it. I'm like, does it taste different? Like, is there maybe this one was really old buck and he tastes gross and they didn't want to touch him? I'm like, no, they're both young deer and off the same farm in the same evening. They weren't prepared any different. One wasn't left out for a week and then put in there. Like, everything was the exact same. And they just attacked the one and they wouldn't touch the other one until I took the other deer out and I pretty much made them starve. Like, you're going to eat this or else, because they didn't want to touch it. And they'll get like that sometimes with like really greasy animals. So sometimes they don't like touching the bears too much because I think because of their diet. But bears eat, they're not, they're eating dead animals, they're scavengers, they're killing fawns, they're eating actual meat. So their tissues taste differently than a deer that's just eating corn and alfalfa. And they're really greasy too. Bears are nasty to have to do. So sometimes they won't touch bears because they're they taste gross or they taste different. But these two whitetails, I couldn't believe it. They didn't want to eat the one. I don't know if it tasted different or what it was. So I was a little worried with the blacktail coming from California because I was like, well, I don't think it's spoiled, but it could be, but it smelled okay, so I don't know. And I was really nervous. I thought they were just gonna be like, nope, we're gonna be picky today and not touch this, and then I'd have to macerate it or do something different. And yeah, they got on it right away. So I was pretty happy about that because it just makes my life a little easier. But
Crazy.
yeah, no, that one turned out good.
We packed in on Friday. We spotted him on Saturday morning, shot him Saturday night. The next day, he kept the hide on the first night, and the next day when we started to debone the meat for the pack out, he took the hide off the head, so it was just a skull. So that was Sunday, and then they ended up packing out on Monday, I believe. Yeah. So it had been dead for a day and a half because we shot it, yeah, Saturday evening. It had been dead for a day and a half before it got packed out to a cooler. And after that, I don't know what he did with the care of it. I don't know if he put it on ice in his cooler or what he did because two of them packed out. I stayed in with another buddy that packed in with us, and that's when I shot my bear. So I don't know what the care was like in between him leaving camp and then him getting it to you. But do you do you prefer like can people ship it with dry ice in there just like they would meat home just so it stays good in the mail, or how do you go about the mailing?
Yeah, I think the mailmen appreciate that more because it won't rot, especially if it's coming from a long ways away. But if someone's gonna ship me a skull, the best way to go about it is to deep freeze it first, make sure it's frozen really good and solid, and then wrap it in newspapers because newspaper is a really good insulator, and then just pack it in a cooler with either dry ice or just a bunch of ice pack. I know ice packs are heavy, so that would make shipping more, but dry ice or ice packs and just try to keep it frozen solid as long as they can before they actually ship it to me. And then just do the quickest shipping they can do. If it's a 2-day ground or a 1-day ground shipping, or not saying anyone has to like, overnight air it to me or anything like that. But as long as it stays cool and cold as long as it can, it'll slow down that decomposing process. It'll make my life easier. And then it's not going to be spoiled by the time it comes to me. Usually I did a gator a couple of years ago, 16-foot gator from Florida or Georgia. Anyway, and it was frozen solid in like this giant, he actually shipped it in, it was almost like a big rolling tote. It had wheels on it and everything. And then that tote was duct taped shut. And it took me like an hour to unpack this thing. But it was a 3-day ground ship. And by the time I got it, it was so well packed in there. It was still hard as rock frozen. That's how I want every single one to go. And I know that's completely unrealistic to think that way, but that one was done perfectly, especially since gators are really gross and full of bacteria. And I just cringe when I get them. I mean, I love doing them because they turn out so cool, but they kind of scare me because that same person that I interned with in high school, he got poked by a gator tooth and turned septic from it, from just a tiny little poke, because they're so full of bacteria. They're so nasty. He closed up his shop because he's like, my life isn't worth doing this. Like, it's just a business, it's a job. I can get another job, but it almost killed me. So I'm done. I'm closing my doors. So gators make me nervous just because of that. But then I had an episode last October that I missed our elk hunt because same thing happened to me, but with a cow. So it doesn't really matter, I guess, what they are at this point. So yeah, bacteria is not fun, man.
I had on here whitening methods and degreasing methods. Is there anything to that? Like, is there anything different that
Oh
you do?
man, that's everything to it.
Okay, let's talk about that. So let's go degreasing first because so once the beetles do their thing, they get it all fleshed out, they get it clean, you have to degrease it then, correct? And then you whiten it?
Right. Yeah, and that's a step that a lot of people don't do, especially if they're just boiling it in their garage. They think, oh, it's clean because there's no skin on it anymore, so now we can just whiten it. But no, if you don't degrease a skull, and some skulls are different than others, some have more grease in them than others, depending on the animal's diet. So bears and wild hogs are the bane of my existence to degrease. They take forever. I just finished a wild hog a couple months ago and I was degreasing that thing for over a year. And I feel bad when people kind of get on my ass about like, oh, is my skull done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? I'm like, technically, yes, but I'm not happy with it yet because there's still grease in it. I could whiten it and give it to you today, and you would think, cool, it looks great, and throw it on your wall or throw it in your garage or whatever, and that'll be the end of it. But give it 6 months, give it a year, give it 2 years, and it's going to start looking wet. Like you'll see wet spots, especially where like the jaw hinge is, and then behind the eyes, and then the very back of the skull, which I get that most of the time it's hanging on a wall. You can't see it anyway. That grease, which is, we call it grease, but it's fat that's in the bone or in the bone marrow, is that's just slowly bleeding out through the skull pores and through I guess the skull plates and the joints and everything. And that'll lead to just that yellowing that you'll see on some skulls, like, oh, this skull was shot or this deer was shot so long ago and it's yellowed, and you think it's just yellowing because of age. It's not. It's yellowed because that grease is starting to slowly leach out of that bone, and it's just going to ruin your mount. Some people don't care. I care very much. I think it looks awful when you have a greasy mount. And honestly, sometimes they'll just start to, if it's really greasy and you don't do anything about it, it'll kind of start to stink because it's that fat will turn rancid as it's leaching out of the bone, and it can get an odor to it. Sometimes it'll actually attract bugs, and it can be really hard to clean too because that skull itself will feel almost sticky. So and then it feels sticky, it gets dust on it. Now it's just gross looking, and you just ruined your mount. I mean, you can fix it, but if you just do it right the first time, you don't have to fix it later. So degreasing is a huge process, but it's a very necessary part of having a really well done European mount. And we try to do our best to pull as much as that of that grease out of there as you can. And I mean, you can get a lot of it out. Inevitably, you're not going to be able to do everything and get everything out, but we can get pretty close and get a lot of it out. And if it's fully degreased, it's going to whiten up beautifully. We've had some that people will pick them up and they'll be like, did you paint it? Did you paint this white with just white acrylic paint? I'm like, no, that's what it looks like when you pull the grease out and it whitens nicely. It's supposed to be that white, which is about like the best compliment you can give a skull cleaner is, did you paint this white? No, but thank you. Um, but yeah, that grease it can be stubborn in especially animals that have a really greasy diet. Bears and hogs are definitely the worst because of what they eat. They're omnivores. They're going to eat meat that already has fat in it, and that fat's just going to set in the bone more. And so they take longer to degrease than others. Whitetails, they could take anywhere from a month to 6 months to degrease, depending on what they are. And I've actually found that mule deer are really greasy animals, which kind of contradicts my normal thinking of, okay, they're eating like scrubby sagebrush and whatever out in out in the high country. Why are they this greasy? Shouldn't the corn-fed whitetails around here have a lot of grease in the bone, and they'll be really fatty, and which some are, but yeah, mule deer too. I don't get it. They're really greasy. But yeah, they're kind of a pain to degrease too. But I'll use like Dawn dish soap is probably the most popular common thing to use to degrease stuff with, just regular Blue Dawn. Anything with other color to it, like we've tried using like that orange Ajax because it was on sale, and it's actually there's dyes in it that will stain the bone a little bit. So we just stay away from that. We'll just use the regular plain Blue Dawn, or 3%, 5% ammonia is really good. And then sometimes if we're dealing with a really stubborn, greasy bear or greasy hog, I'll just go to straight acetone, which is really expensive, but it gets the job done really quick, and it does a great job without hurting the bone. That's the main thing, is we don't want to compromise that bone or do anything too powerful to it or too chemically potent that's going to cause that bone itself to break down. That's where you see like some of the flaking or the chipping that you'll get from other mounts that you've seen that have been either boiled too much, or they use something that's way too potent and it just starts to break down that bone. A lot of water changes will usually, me anyway, I'll just throw it in either a tote bin or a bucket of warm water. Heat always speeds up the degreasing process too. It's not necessary, but just a regular like fish tank heater that'll keep the degreasing solution usually between 100 and 115 degrees is ideal. And it'll speed up the degreasing process, but like I said, it's not necessary. I'll usually just throw them in a bucket of water and, a couple squirts of Dawn and some warm water on top of it. And like I said, if they're being really stubborn, some acetone in there or some ammonia, and seal them up. Make sure that's in a well ventilated area. You don't want to do that in your house, and you're going to die of fumes. But back corner of the garage with the window cracked is fine. But all that grease and fat needs to leach out of the bone, needs to seep out of there. Then they whiten up beautifully. And there's actually some that people are like, well, I want the more natural look. I don't want them whitened. I'm like, okay, I won't. And they'll pick them up and be like, I didn't want them whitened. I'm like, I didn't. That's just how the bone is supposed to look when it's properly processed and that grease is pulled out of there. So yeah, properly done degreased skull will whiten up just beautifully. And if it's not degreased, you're gonna have problems down the road. If it's not right away, it'll be 5, 6 months. Give it a year, and it's gonna look like crap. So
How long? So you said whitetails can take anywhere. I think you said 1 to 6 months or 2 to 6 months. Um,
mhm.
you've done elk, and I think you've done a moose. I think you did a pretty nice moose, didn't you?
I did a big moose. A guy did it. Well, it was like he said it was his retirement present to himself. This guy was in, I think, his 70s when he shot this moose in Alaska, giant Boone and Crockett moose. And he said he saved up for like 30 years, I think, to afford that hunt. He said he just put away like 2 grand a year to be able to afford this giant fly-in, 2 week in the backcountry style hunt. For him, it was once in a lifetime, and he earned it. And he shot this monster moose. And the only reason they brought it to me to be European mounted instead of shoulder mounted is because they didn't have the room in their house to hang a shoulder mount moose of that size. Because it was, I can't tell you how big this thing was. It was, I don't know, 66 inches wide spread, whatever it was. Just, I had to build a new tank in my shop just to physically get it through the door and get it in there. Like it was just ginormous. I actually still have scars on my leg from this freaking moose because trying to hold it up for a picture, I was trying to prop it up like by setting it on my leg, and its back molars were so sharp it poked right through my pants and like left gashes on my thigh. So I always have a reminder of doing this, my first moose ever, and he bit me. So he was a pain to degrease and deal with and everything just because of his sheer size. I couldn't move him by myself. I had to wait till Andrew got home from work to help me just move him from one tank to another because the skull itself with these two giant paddles on it, I mean, it weighed over 100 pounds. And so, yeah, that one was an adventure to try to degrease that and clean it and whiten it. But it turned out so freaking awesome. And the guy's super happy with it. The guy's wife's super happy with it that she doesn't have to build an extension to her house just to put this thing in it. So that thing probably took close to 10 months, I think, to finish that one, start to finish. So, and I feel bad when people are like, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? I'm like, I'm working on it. It's coming. I can't, there's a huge bottleneck in the degreasing process. It slows it down because every animal's different in how much time it's going to take to actually suck all that grease out of the bone. Like I said, some can be done in 4 to 6 weeks, some take a year. It just kind of depends on how finicky they're going to be and how greasy they were to begin with. And that's something you cannot speed up the process, because if you do, you're going to compromise it and it's going to flake on you, or it's not going to be a good end product. So they take time and they take patience and they take swearing sometimes. And it just makes me laugh when people ask me like, oh, what's your process? What do you use to degrease? And I say hopes, prayers, swears, and tears. And that'll usually get the job done. So
So it's not like if they bring it to you, it's not a don't expect it to be a quick turnaround just because it's just the skull, right? Like it it's just like taking it to a taxidermist. There's the whole tanning process. They send it off to a tannery and they get it back, and then they got to let it dry and air out and all that stuff. You have a like doing just the skulls has a process to it as well that takes time.
oh yeah. Yeah. And I think that's such a common misconception among, oh, so and so did it and I got it back in a week. I'm sure you did, but you're going to be upset a year from now or 2 years from now. Or as far as I'm concerned, so the people that get on my butt about that, and I'm going to try not to rant too much, people that tell me like, oh, so and so got theirs back in a week and they're perfectly happy. If you're perfectly happy with the product you got back in 1 week, please take it to them, because I don't need you on my ass every week for the next 6 months. Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Well, no, because this product, this caliber product I'm going to give you is way different from the one that gave you, a week long turnaround time. And you're just going to throw it on your shed, look at it once a year, be like, oh, I shot that deer. Cool. But if you want something that's going to stay white, that the teeth are going to be glued, the nasal bones are going to be glued together, it's not going to break on you. It's going to be fully degreased. It's going to be white. It's going to be easy to clean and dust years from now because it's not sticky. Like, that takes time. And if you're fine taking it to Joe Schmo, whoever that's going to boil it in his garage for beer money, and you're going to have it back tomorrow afternoon, go ahead, take it there, please, because the people that bring it to me, they have a longer wait, but it's a better product. So, and it's all about what you're happy with. If you're happy with just boiling it in your garage, good for you. Cool. Like, I'm sure if you're happy, I'm happy. So, but lost sleep over skulls before that. I've sent them out before I was happy with them and I thought they were done simply because someone was getting impatient. That's something that I need to deal with a lot because Andrew will be like, it's fine. If they're happy, be happy for them. I'm like, I know, but there's a grease spot that wasn't done yet. They're not going to notice. They won't even notice. I know, but I know it's there. And I put my name on that product. And because I know it's there, it bothers me. So yeah, I think that's what everybody in the taxidermy or skull cleaning community is going to have to deal with at one point or another. I mean, I've talked to world champion taxidermists that, lose sleep over an animal, like getting the eyelashes just right, or, something along those lines. And then the customer comes, picks it up. Yep, looks good. Just grabs her around the neck, throws it in the bed of their truck and just takes it home. And it's like, why did I lose sleep over this thing? They don't care. Like, I
Right.
don't know.
Well, I mean, you guys have an eye for it. You guys have an eye for that type of stuff, which is why you got into it. Like the average me, I'll admit, I don't have, I mean, I can obviously tell with touching that earlier, the difference between the skull that you clean and the skull that I got done out in California. But I can see that. But as far as like the minute details of like there's a little grease spot back here, yeah, probably not going to see that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's stuff that for like taxidermists and stuff, it just jumps off the play data. So we're just like, oh, just give it to me. I'll fix it. I have to fix it or I can't sleep tonight. like like my buddy Trevor, like he's gotten so many, like his bear skull, for an example, he dropped it off to somebody and they cleaned it in an afternoon or whatever it was. He's like, oh yeah, I got my bear back already. I'm like, it's been 2 days. Oh yeah, it looks great. No, it doesn't. It's missing teeth, for crying out loud. Like it doesn't look good. It's front teeth are gone. You can tell they boiled it and then they power washed it and then just slapped some whitening paint on it almost and then called it good. And he doesn't care that it looks terrible because he thinks it looks fine. So if the customer's fine with it, I'm fine with it. But yeah, it's a pet peeve of mine. I suppose it'd be like, a world champion taxidermist going to a dive bar and there's crappy mounts hanging there from like the 70s that are all weathered and smoke turned them yellow and everything. And they're probably like sitting in there just getting the shakes because they can't stand looking at it. So
Whitening methods, the last part of the process. So we've talked about beetle care, we've talked about degreasing, whitening methods. That's the last bit that some people don't always want, but that's the last bit of it. What are the methods out there, and then what do you do?
pretty much the one and only thing that gets stuff white without hurting it is peroxide. The level of peroxide varies. Some people like the dollar dark container of peroxide you get from the drugstore or a dollar store or whatever. I think that's only a 3% peroxide. That will get stuff white for sure, but it takes a long time. So if you've got 6 months to just let it sit in a bucket covered because that'll evaporate and it'll lose its potency, by all means, go ahead and do it. It's a very gentle whitening, so you're not going to hurt anything. But most people don't have that kind of time to just sit around and wait. So there's more potent peroxide. I think once you get up to like 15 or 18% peroxide, that stuff is really powerful. You don't want that stuff to get heated up because the vapors will probably kill you. And you need gloves and not quite a hazmat suit, but you need to be very well protected because that stuff will burn your skin and stain your skin. And then there's all the way up to like 34% peroxide, which is like food grade. That's what they clean like, I don't know, big stainless steel vats and stuff with. And it's actually really hard to get. And there's only a couple legal methods to go about getting it. I may or may not have towed the line a couple times getting my hands on some of that stuff, but after using it, I don't think it's worth the risk using it. It's so potent and bad for you. You can't breathe it in. You have to use like two different pairs of latex gloves handling it. You don't want to splash on anything. Like it'll pretty much like eat the varnish off a table type stuff. It's so potent. So it's not worth dealing with stuff that potent, I guess. So I've been using, it's just a basic whitener that you get from like a Sally Beauty Supply. It's like hair gel, hair cream that people use to like bleach their hair with. So it's called Salon Volume 40 is what I use. And it just comes in these big jugs that they use in hair salons to whiten hair with. Mix that with some extra whitening powder that you also get from a hair salon and paint that on. It kind of gets to be like a paste, or I don't know, like a really thick white paint. Paint that on there, wrap it up, put it in the sunlight because heat will activate it and keep it. If it dries out, it won't work anymore. So you want to keep it wrapped up, keep it soft. And then I'll just usually put that on a skull, let it sit in the sun for a day or two, rinse it off, good to go. And that's what I've had the most success with, and it's the least messy version. I've tried, I don't know how many different avenues. And if you submerge a skull, like if you take an elk and you put it in a big bucket with peroxide, well, now the bases are going to get colored because obviously that water is going to touch the bases, and now you have to retouch up with either paint or stain or something later to get that color back. But yeah, I've just had the best luck with like the basic, like the hair creams and stuff. And a lot of people that boil skulls will also just bleach them, and bleach is such a huge no-no because that just destroys the bone. Yeah, it gets them white, but it destroys the bone. So if someone's like, "Oh, can you bleach it for me?" Yeah, I'll whiten it for you. Bleach is a naughty word, so we don't
So
use that.
the stuff that you use then it doesn't have any bleach in it.
It's only peroxide.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know most of this conversation that we talked about today. I had no idea about. So this is
Mhm.
pretty cool.
Most people don't get that involved into it. They just either, like I said, like they'll just throw it in a vat of boiling water and drink a few beers, and when the tissues fall off it, they call it good. And they're like, "Oh, there, my skull's done in 2 hours." Well, no, it's technically clean, but not really. Yeah. So no, it's always an interesting conversation, and there's, like I said, there's stuff to learn every day. I've been doing this, I guess, full time, professionally, whatever, for since 2018. But I'm still learning stuff every day. I've got a lot of good chat groups that there's people that have been doing it for 40 years that are constantly giving like new trade secrets, or this brand of degreaser is better than this brand, or stay away from this product because the ammonia percentage is too high, or what have you, stuff like that. So it's kind of, it's, you're learning stuff every day, which is why it's such an interesting conversation, because there's just new stuff constantly evolving. There's new products coming out that are making your lives a little bit easier, making the process a little better. And so it's just fun. It's fun to do. And I think I'm going to be doing this for a while yet because I kind of like it. So,
Pretty cool stuff. If people want to get a hold of you, are you on Facebook, Instagram? How do people get a hold of you?
oh yeah, Facebook. Just my name's just Audrey Fafi on Facebook. I have a business page on there, which is A2 Skull Works. But the hackers have been having a field day with that lately, so I've been battling that for like the last year. So I may or may not be able to get back to messages on my business page on there. But I also have a business page on Instagram, which is doing all right. Just A2 Skull Works on Instagram. So that's where I'm at.
I'll attach those in the show link or the show notes, so that way if you guys are listening and you want to take a look at what she does, you can check her out on Instagram, because it seems like, and Facebook, I guess, but message her on Instagram if you want to get a hold of her. Does awesome work. She's done a blacktail from California of a buddy of mine. She's done a whitetail of mine. Hopefully she gets to do an elk or something this year of mine. I'm going out for 2.5 weeks, so hopefully we can get it done. Well, thank you for hopping on.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for tuning in to the Wilderness Fitness Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please head over to your podcast app and consider leaving a review. If you think a friend or a family member may benefit from listening to this podcast, please consider sharing this episode with them. We appreciate your help in the growth of this podcast. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram for even more content, and the weekly Hump Day Q&A, where you can get all of your human performance, rehab, women's health, and injury prevention questions answered. If you're interested in getting hooked up with even more content from Wilderness PT from the comfort of your own home, head over to wildernessphysicaltherapy.com and get signed up for the Spike Camp membership. This is where you'll have access to prior seminars and a workout that'll have you in shape each fall, designed by yours truly. Since you're there, check out the mid-month media newsletter that goes out 1 to 2 times a month, which includes a variety of topics with the most recent research on health and human performance. You can sign up by hovering over the free resources section and subscribe to any of the free guides, or simply sign up under the mid-month media newsletter tab.